Flooding is getting worse, and we are all becoming far too familiar with scenes like these.
Clear the house, clear the room.
The way we've farmed since the Second World War has left many soils unable to infiltrate and store much of the rain that falls. And this means water tends to run straight off and into the river systems, overwhelming the villages and towns.
Flooding can be devastating. It can put people's lives and homes and possessions at risk. It's forecast to get worse across the West Country, with peak rainfall intensities predicted to go up by 30% and the corresponding flow in the rivers by over 40% in the 2080s.
I grew up on this farm and I've seen flood events getting worse throughout my lifetime.
The water was coming straight off the down because of the compaction, straight down the footpath and flooding below.
The water would fall and then it would just skate off very quickly because there was nothing to impede it and hold it back.
It's like when it rains, somehow this channels loads of water down off the common and brings it all down here.
Just the ruts in the field after a heavy downpour. You didn't have to be a soil scientist to work out the damage we were doing. We farm on the banks of the Tavy, and I don't want to really consider how much of our valuable nutrients we have lost into the Tamar estuary.
Farmers have the opportunity to change the way in which we're using this landscape. They have the skills, they have the knowledge, and of course they have the wherewithal to make sure we can manage this land for better water resources for society as a whole.
I feel like it's a real responsibility to make sure that we are holding on to water at this point to prevent it running off and affecting the people further down the stream.
Policy alone cannot solve this problem. These upland areas have some of the highest rainfalls in the country. We need all the landowners, all the farmers with that intimate knowledge of how water flows on that landscape to try and intervene and slow that down. So how are we going to put farmers in a position where they're actually willing to welcome water back onto their land?
Take me away, for I just cannot stay, or I'll sink in my skin and my bones. The water sustains me without even trying. The water can't drown me, I'm done with my dying.
Good water management is about how we slow the flow and store the water in the soil profile instead of it running off and flooding our urban settlements. But this isn't the sort of flood mitigation work people are used to seeing. In our towns and cities, we tend to do the opposite of this. We tend to speed the water up and make sure that we move the floodwaters downstream and away from the urban centres as quickly as possible.
We're in the centre of Exeter City today, and we're having a look at what you may consider as more traditional flood defence that you may be more used to seeing. During times of high flow, the River Exe comes down here and spills to the side and comes down this man-made channel. There's about 3,000 houses that are benefiting from the work that we've done here. Natural flood management is designed to do something very different to this. It works in the catchment upstream of locations like this to slow down the flow that's arriving in urban areas to hold water back in the landscape as much as possible.
To achieve this, we need to be concentrating on soil health. We need farmers to allow their soils to be sponges for water, absorbing in times of flood and releasing in times of drought.
Natural flood management can include things like changing grazing behaviour to improve soil health, increasing tree cover and plant diversity for a greater variety of root depth. We can also create small barriers and diversions to encourage the runoff to soak away and keep water away from roads and footpaths.
The more nature-based solutions that we use, the more societal benefits come from it. Things like drought tolerance, increased carbon storage, biodiversity improvements, connecting existing habitats and things like that just aren't possible with this type of defence, but they are using natural flood management.
Simon Bailey, I'm the landowner here of 15 acres in these fields and also of the common land above. Previously, water was coming straight off the down because of the compaction and straight down the footpath and flooding below. So with funding from the West Country Rivers Trust, we put in 3 small ponds, 1 large pond at the bottom to slow the flow, hold it up here and increase nature at the same time whilst minimising the loss of grazing. It was a fully funded project, so I haven't had to put my hand in my pocket for any of the work. Well, day 2 of Storm Bert. This is the diversion in action under its most extreme conditions probably so far. So the step in front of me wasn't here before, so this is what we put in. So we diverted everything that's coming off of the down up here, away from going down the footpath and into this field. So you can see the water coming in here, then gets dissipated out, and then it is also draining through this swale. So one of the things we know about climate change and biodiversity loss is the severity of events are going to increase. And so that's one of the reasons that we put this scheme in order to give ourselves some resilience during the summer months when we might have drought and in the winter when we've got peak events.
Simon has done some brilliant work here, and thanks to grants, he hasn't had to pay for any of it. But as good as this work is, it is treating the symptom of a much bigger problem.
Driving on the land, coupled with the use of synthetic fertilisers and wormers, have killed off much of the soil biology. Shifts in grazing practice, where we leave animals in one place much longer than we used to, with little or no rest periods for the land, all means that the ground has become compacted.
Instead of redirecting this water as an act of damage limitation, how can we address the problem at its root cause and reduce the flow of that water coming off the hill in the first place?
To answer this question, we need to go to the top of the hill. I've come to meet University of Exeter hydrologist Professor Richard Brazier to better understand how things have changed over time and what solutions the uplands can offer us.
Starting 200 or 300 years ago, we began to drain these upland landscapes so that we could farm for more of the year, even actually grow some arable crops up here. What we think is a natural and wild landscape all around us is actually a kind of post-industrial, intensively farmed landscape, wherein the water, when it rains, falls and rapidly accelerates through the drainage network. As a byproduct of improving the land for agriculture, it had a consequence of enhancing flood risk downstream.
Uplands like Dartmoor are rich in peat, part of the Earth's soil carbon sponge. This has built up over millennia from layers and layers of organic matter. But man-made drainage and peat extraction has damaged this landscape's natural ability to hold on to water.
Right on the top of the hill here, where the peatland has been ditched, or it's maybe been cut over for fuel that was made into charcoal, or it's perhaps been burnt or in some places overgrazed, we can do things to slow the flow of the water, particularly in the deep peats, store more water when it rains, and subsequently release water more slowly in the dry times, and this is called peatland restoration, moorland restoration, and it's actively happening in certain locations on Dartmoor to the point where the moorland is re-becoming a kind of sponge.
So we've got two types of peatland here on Dartmoor. We've got blanket bog, which is on the top of the hills, and that's rain-fed only. It receives no other nutrients, and that's a thick body of peatland that's made by sphagnum moss. And that's a rare European designated habitat. But down here in the valley bottoms, we've got what we call valley mires, and these are deeper peatlands that are fed by groundwater. Valley mires are really important for water quality and quantity. So this big body of peat is soaking up water and holding it like a sponge and then releasing it slowly, so we don't get those peaks and troughs of flow. So I grew up here as a child, and there were many less trees and less scrubs then. And the sward everywhere was a lot closer and tighter. And the water would fall and then it would just skate off very quickly because there was nothing to impede it and hold it back.
There's ditches that come down the hill there, and the idea was just basically get water off the land as quickly as possible. So it whooshed straight down beside the hedge in a ditch all the way into the stream. So throughout the farm, wherever we've got sort of low areas and water is running off quickly, we're looking at ways we can re-wet it. And it's fairly simple stuff. It's basically coming in with a digger and just blocking generally sort of low ditches, which will then just hold water back. We blocked the ditch where it went into the stream down there and formed this long, thin, sinewy pond, and then the water flows into a bog, so it has to work really hard to get into a river.
So this is a simple and really valuable intervention that most of us could do on our own land, and with the right grant, we could even be paid to do it. What's more, this can be really beneficial to the local ecology.
When the valley mires are managed under a sustainable grazing regime, and that's usually with cattle, then they create an amazing habitat for a huge range of wildlife. I think now, because we've got more surface roughness and different in heights of vegetation, then the path of the water is slowed. And that's really good for us because it keeps our habitats wetter, so that's good for biodiversity. In the summer, sometimes we get mini droughts, and that holding the water here means that we've got a lot more available for our livestock throughout the drier periods. I feel it's my duty to look after this place and be a custodian as well as I can. And looking after the water environment is a very easy way of doing that. If I think what's good for water, it's often really good for lots of other things as well.
Runoff is a problem faced by many farmers in upland areas around the UK. So I've travelled to Shropshire to meet another farmer, Claire Hill, who farms in a way that increases resilience to high rainfall. Crucially, she's been out wintering her cattle and increased her profitability in doing so.
The most cost-effective system is to have animals outside all year round. Ruminants are not designed to live in sheds. So the way in which we achieve that is with bale grazing. So we make hay in the summer. This field was simple because we made hay in here, and we've positioned the bales where we want them for the winter. So in the winter we'll roll them out. So that's for our group of cows it works well. We're a bale of hay a day, and they're only in this one area for one day. So even if it's a bit wet, because they're only here for a day, the damage is only ever superficial. Last winter, in the worst rainfall event, it was water up to here and as wide out. The water would have been almost coming over my head here. Water infiltration was the key thing for me that got me thinking differently about the way we farm. So it was when I was managing a farm on a floodplain. During lambing, it was so wet, we had lambs underwater, it was a nightmare. And then 3 weeks later, we had cracks in the ground. And I just had this moment of where has all the water gone? And it wasn't until I started digging holes that I then realised where all the water was going. Because we would dig a hole and we would find, although we've had rain in the last few days, when we go So any more than a few centimetres down, the soil is almost completely dry. And I realised in that moment that the water was hitting the ground and running off, not hitting the ground and infiltrating in. We talk a lot about diversity, and one of the reasons we want diversity of plants is to have varying rooting depths.
To help relieve this problem in our modified landscapes without predators, we can use electric fences, GPS virtual fence systems, and mob-style rotational grazing to replicate natural herd behaviour. Mob grazing mimics nature's way of controlling herbivores to reduce overgrazing. Good rest periods allows for more diverse, robust swards that lets water infiltrate, reducing downstream flooding.
We move the cows every day because we're trying to build more resilience into our system. And by managing the grazing in that way, we grow a lot more grass and we get a lot more diversity, which is better for their health and better for soil health. They've just moved in, so their heads down and really grazing. What's great about this type of system is when they come in, it's new grass, so they're kind of grabbing at everything, and you see them taking thistles, taking nettles, taking the long grass, the seed heads, a little bit of everything, whatever they're feeling like they need. It's kind of like a salad bar. We work on daily moves before they move into the next cell, and we would expect to take about 50% of this material away and leave 50% behind. When you only take away only up to 50%, it doesn't affect the root growth at all, but when we take away more than 50%, the roots start to die off, and that affects how quickly the plant regrows. Most water troughs in our UK farming system are static. It's one of the biggest blockers to being able to take a field from set stock to mob or AMP or holistic plan grazing. So this one is key because it's light, so I can physically pick it up and tip it and get it out and move it around.
Access to water for our livestock is crucial when we start moving animals in this way, and it can be a barrier. This is where the right grants can help to support farmers who are willing to try new systems.
We are going to get help from the FIPL grant, which will give us water in every field, and it will also give us the opportunity to divide the field. So the FIPL grant is going to be a real game changer on moving forward, on how quickly we get real production improvements from this system without input. We're not just rearing animals to sell. These animals are the fertility builders out here. You know, we're not buying any phosphates, any potash.
What David and Claire are demonstrating could be described as a modern take on historical herding practices. But the practicalities of these grazing systems need to be considered. Only time will tell how we can replicate those benefits in an open moorland setting.
We've built on many of our floodplains, but making use of the remaining natural floodplains and wetlands can act as a buffer to peak rainfall events. But these habitats are rare and often under threat, and they must be farmed in a really sensitive way.
The floodplains are designed to take floodwater, but we have taken so many actions over the previous centuries to speed up the flow from higher land down to the rivers and the estuary and the sea. Wetlands are important because they function in the landscape. They do work. There's often unnoticed. For example, they can be regarded as the kidneys of the landscape by improving water quality and delivering clean water to our streams and rivers. They can hold substantial amounts of runoff and so help to mitigate and desynchronize flood events downstream.
So for landowners and farmers with floodplains, what can we do differently to help the situation?
The real key is to bring about actions that will slow down that flow of water from the moorland or the hilltops through the valley system into the estuaries and to the sea. In other words, to see what I would describe as the whole scape, not just the landscape or the farmscape, but to see how this whole connectivity can be restored for the benefit of sustainable development in the future.
This is my home farm where I grew up, but it looked very different back then. We used to graze our animals right to the water's edge, and we kept the sward way too short. But this land is a floodplain, and it can't be that tidy. It took some really serious flooding events in the village just below us for us to realise that we had to allow it to do that job again.
I've brought Richard here to the floodplain on my own land to get a hydrologist's perspective on how water's behaving here.
We're maybe 100 metres away from the river here, and we can see these are riverbed pebbles that would have taken thousands of years to round off like this. And they're always great evidence for me of what a floodplain is. It's a place where at time the river was, at any one time, often for a long time. And just because it's not there now doesn't mean to say that it shouldn't be there. Normally, and in a natural river functioning system, water would come over the bank of the river many dozens of times a year, pretty much every time there's a decent storm. Nowadays, in the contemporary landscape that we've created, really floodplains are only inundated a handful of times a year. And it's imposed more of a flood risk on all the landscape, the settlements and such like downstream of those floodplains.
We've talked about lots of different ways to naturally slow the flow of water, but there's one native species who will do a lot of the work that we are currently paying for, and they'll do it for free: beavers.
Beavers work all night to fastidiously slow the flow of water, creating complex wetland habitats. As they work, they tend to push water out laterally, widening the body of water, and this is where they might come into conflict with landowners. Allowing reasonable buffer zones in these riparian corridors can minimise any issues.
We're here beside this river and we can actually see evidence of free-living beavers. What do you feel about beavers in the wider landscape?
Well, I think they're incredible. As you know, they are remarkable ecosystem engineers, and they don't take a salary, which is a great asset.
Beavers have been building dams, managing water resources for millions of years. They're actually incredibly good at it, and in natural landscapes, I would argue they're significantly better at it than we are.
Beavers are legally protected and spreading naturally throughout our catchments, so it may not be long before you find a beaver family making a lodge in your area.
What we realise from our research is that it's a tiny fraction of the farmable land that perhaps could be given to making space for water and making space for nature. In fact, when we model these catchments, it's less than 5% of the total land area if we threw a buffer of 50 metres either side of every stream, every pond, every ditch and every river that would need to be used to make more space for that water and nature. And of course a lot of that, what we call the riparian strip, those corridors along our streams and rivers, already isn't farmed.
So we've seen some really powerful interventions here that are helping farmers financially and environmentally. But how much improvement are they really bringing to the communities downstream?
The river behind us now is running quite full following the rain this weekend. But in 2012, the arch you can see behind was actually full of water, so the whole river had backed up. It pulled up against the wall behind me and formed a massive pond. And that pond then grew larger and larger and ended up flooding a lot of the houses along the lane behind us. I think there were about 18 or 20 houses flooded in total that year. But since then there's been so much work done within the community, lots of property protection work, I think the work that's happened on Dartmoor has been really effective in reducing the flow of water into the rivers.
We've done some great work with landowners, the National Park Authority and the commoners upstream of Buckfastleigh to implement nature-based solutions and natural flood management in the catchment upstream. So that's ranged from all sorts of things, like there are now hundreds of leaky dams at the top of the catchment. We've planted some trees, we've reconnected areas of floodplain, and we've restored some rivers back to their natural state. There's still plenty more to do, but we're starting to see signs that that work is effective and it's reducing risk to properties that would have flooded in events previously.
So as farmers, how can we tap into this support? Grant systems are complex and can be hard to navigate, but there are people whose job it is to help.
You've seen some things now that will hopefully inspire you to have a go at doing some of these techniques on your own land. If you wanted to have some advice, some support and some funding to make it happen, come to the Dartmoor Headwaters project team. If you're not in Dartmoor and you wanted to have a go somewhere else, come to ourselves at the Environment Agency, Natural England or the Forestry Commission or one of your regular farm advisors, and we can point you in the right direction.
This might be hard to visualise at landscape scale, but imagine if all those interventions were going on at the same time across the catchment. We could really slow that water down. Our farms, managed right, can create food and water security and mitigate against fire, flood and drought. If we can pull this off at catchment level, it's a win-win. We must welcome farmers that are willing to step up and take on this huge responsibility,
But they must be supported.
I'm looking forward to the day when we can all recognise farmers as the heroes in this climate change story.
The water sustains me without even trying.